In the hub, Peter Adams includes an excerpt, or a selection, from Mike Rose's blog, Grit Revisited. In the essay, Rose responds to research presented by psychologist Angela Duckworth from the University of Pennsylvania. In her research, Duckworth focuses on the qualities that make some high-achieving students successful and hypothesizes, or comes up with an idea, that one quality that stands out above all others is a student's grit or perseverance. If you'd like to learn more about Duckworth's theory, let's check out this video.
I recently read the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. Angela's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's obsessed with finding out the answer to the question, who's successful and why? She's conducted studies involving national spelling bee champions, elite military training graduates, and top corporate salespeople to determine what was the biggest predictor of their success. She wondered, was it talent or was it effort? Now, our society would have us believe that it would be talent. We have the tendency to marvel at natural talent and overlook the importance of effort. Surveys show that we commend people who put in the effort, but we don't actually believe it can compete with natural talent. We often discount our own abilities when going up against people who have a higher IQ or appear more naturally gifted. But Angela has found the following to be true in study after study. Where talent counts once, effort counts twice. Angela explains this using a simple formula. Talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. When you apply effort to any base level talent, you get skill. When you apply effort to skill, you get achievement. The science shows that grit, the sustained application of effort towards a long-term goal, is the biggest predictor of lifelong achievement. For some, it's an inconvenient truth. Certain people like to see natural talent and use it as an excuse as to why they would never achieve what those people can, and don't even bother trying in the first place. But for others, it can be liberating, knowing that they're not doomed to mediocrity due to a lack of talent. If they put in the effort, they can achieve great things. Sure, there are some limitations. All of us can't make the NBA. We're not all 6'9". But you could become one of the best players in your local basketball league. By remembering that talent counts once, effort counts twice, we can be hopeful that we can one day become more than we think we can, that we can achieve great things despite not winning the talent lottery. But being gritty is hard. Resisting endless temptations to quit or experiencing failure is extremely difficult to deal with. But Angela says we all have the ability to grow our grit if we direct our focus in 4 specific ways. First, develop a fascination with what you're trying to do. Second, strive to improve each day. Third, remind yourself of the greater purpose. And fourth, adopt a growth mindset. Charles Darwin admitted to not having great quickness of apprehension. To discover the mysteries of natural science without possessing supernatural intelligence, Darwin developed an obsessive fascination and was said to keep questions alive in the back of his mind, questions that related to what he was observing, that drove him to discover the connection between all living things. His deep interest in the natural sciences and constant questioning led him to the breakthrough that we now know as the theory of evolution. So what questions are most intriguing to you? Find the questions that fascinate you, and you'll find the capacity to stay gritty while trying to achieve something great. Next, aim to improve yourself every single day. Compete with who you were yesterday. Olympic gold medal swimmer Rowdy Gaines once said, at every practice, I would try to beat myself. If my coach gave me 10 100-meter swims one day and asked me to hold it to 1 minute and 15 seconds, the next day, he would give me 10 100-meter swims, and I would try to hold it to 1 minute and 14 seconds. Angela says that the refrain of all paragons of grit is that whatever it takes, I want to improve. It doesn't matter how excellent they already are. So how can you carve out time each day to push your abilities and seek constant and never-ending improvement? The third way to grow our grit is to remind ourselves of the greater purpose. Angela conducted a survey of 16,000 adult Americans to determine what was a bigger contributor of grit, obtaining a feeling of pleasure or feeling a greater sense of purpose. She found that people on the upper half of her grit scale experienced a similar level of pleasure in what they were doing, But she found that higher levels of purpose directly correlated to higher levels of grit. Angela says, the most gritty people see their ultimate aims as deeply connected to the world beyond themselves. You could be a bricklayer simply laying the bricks for a cathedral, or you could be a bricklayer building the house of God. It's largely up to you to determine what purpose or greater meaning your work has. Whatever you come up with has the capacity to raise your level of grit. The last way to grow your grit is to develop a growth mindset. Bill McNabb, the past CEO of Vanguard, the world's largest provider of mutual funds, interviewed leaders within the organization to see who were successful and who weren't. He found that long-term success was dependent on a core belief. Those who believe that I can't learn anymore, I am what I am, this is how I do things, routinely failed to move up to a senior level. To be gritty, you need to scrap the theory that your abilities are fixed, because it's simply not true. Neuroscience has shown that we have an enormous capacity to change our brains and learn new skills as we get older. The brain is plastic, and you can mold it through sustained effort and experience. Reflect on a time when you started something new that you were scared you couldn't learn, but you actually did. Use the memory of that experience to disrupt any beliefs that your abilities are fixed. In the end, Angela says that learning to stick to something is a life skill that we can all develop. By remembering that the science shows that grit matters more than talent, and that we all have the capacity to grow our grit, we can develop the confidence to start taking action despite how untalented we think we are. That was the core message that I gathered from Angela's book. She has much more material to help you understand the science of achievement. I highly recommend it. If you would like a one-page PDF summary of the insights that I gathered from Angela's book, just click the link below and I'd be happy to email it to you. If you already subscribe to the free Productivity Game newsletter, this PDF is already in your inbox. Thank you for watching.
All right. Mike Rose seems to take a different stance. Rose is a prominent American scholar who writes often about students with, quote, lives on the boundaries because they're poor and disenfranchised. Disenfranchised means that you are often excluded from conversations about equity, classism, racism, sexism, inequalities. You are on the boundaries, you're on the fringes. And so when people talk about upward mobility or success, they often don't think about people who might be disenfranchised or disconnected from those systems. So below is an excerpt from Rose reading from his latest book. Notice in this excerpt that Rose offers a different view of students and their different ways of being and ways of knowing, in this case with Ray, a welding student.
And school. So here's the excerpt. What you see depends on where you sit and for how long. You enter the classroom from the rear, wanting to be discreet on your first visit, and you slip into the desk closest to the door. A few students notice you, but most are walking around or leaning over to the person next to them, talking. Except for one woman, the class is all men. They're in their 20s and 30s. A few white guys, the rest black and Latino. Hoodies, baggy pants, loud profanity. The teacher is in the front at a cloudy overhead projector. 3 men are around him. Each seems bigger than the next, and they are arguing. The room's old and dingy, no windows, bare except for the irregular rows of desks, the table with the projector, a cart holding pipes and metal bars, and in the corner, a worn flag from the American Welding Society. You're trying to take it all in when a sullen guy in an oversized t-shirt, a bandana around his head, walks over you and asks, he asks, "What are you doing here?" The classroom's attached to a large welding shop in a community college welding program. 2 days a week, the welding instructor teaches basic mathematics to his novice welders because some of them checked out of school long ago and never learned or learned poorly how to divide decimal fractions and calculate volume. And some knew it but have been away from it in the military or in a job that folded. Most people who make policy that affects students like these, and a fair number whose research involves them, haven't spent time in such classrooms. And with a few exceptions, those who do aren't there for long. But if you stay and you come back and you come back again, you'll notice that on some days, the baggy jeans and oversized tees are traded off for work shirts with company logos on the back. And as you move around the room, you'll hear that amid the F-bombs, students are explaining to each other how to solve a problem or challenging someone else's explanation. The men walking over to other men's desks are typically bringing their open notebooks with them. And that big to-do that can flare up around the projector, lots of pointing and trash talk, well, that usually involves a disagreement among students about coursework that they take right up to the instructor, the shadows of their fingers flitting across the diagrams on the overhead screen. And that guy who wanted to know what you're doing here, it's a legitimate question, isn't it? And everything depends on how you answer it. When it was posed to me, I said I was there to study programs like this one because we need to know more about them to convince our politicians that we need more of them. The man's features softened, and we moved out into the hallway. We need programs like this, he said, people like us. It's the teacher that really makes a difference, he continued. He treats us like we're people. I later found out more about this man. His name's Ray. Ray had been in the 2-year program for a year, and he's doing well, and in fact just got a job. The boss sent the instructor an email praising Ray, adding that he'd hire anyone else that good. The instructor then told me Ray's story. During his first few weeks in the program, Ray tried to cheat on a test of welding terms by erasing the name on a paper being handed toward the front and writing his own name quickly across the top. This was so pathetic a move that several other students called him out on it, and besides, the instructor could clearly see the traces of Ray's handiwork. Ready to throw Ray out of the program, the instructor called him into his office the next day, angry at both the stupidity and insult of Ray's stunt. Ray was mortified and begged to be given another chance. The ambivalent, uncertain, the instructor relented. You just don't know, he told me. You have to be open in a program like this. Give guys a chance to leave the streets behind. For the instructor, the program was a buffer zone. Some people will change, some won't. It's hard to know in advance, but Ray seems to have made it. So that's the story. Now let's think about it. Let's consider the kind of knowledge involved in this little vignette and the dynamic, evolving nature of that knowledge. What the narrator sees and what he comes to understand about what he sees shifts as he spends more time in the setting. And his interaction with Ray adds to what he learns. Because the narrator is part of a statewide research project, the knowledge he gains can be used to inform other occupational program administrators and policymakers. And this is also the story of what Ray is learning. He's becoming a skilled welder. He's also acquiring other ways of being in the world of school and the world of work, ways of being involving knowledge that's an alternative to the knowledge he brought into the welding program. The instructor possesses knowledge of welding, valued capital, and he also knows how to teach it, what educational psychologist Lee Schulman calls pedagogical content knowledge. The instructor possesses yet another kind of knowledge of the world many of his students come from, which has a significant effect on Ray's opportunity to gain knowledge of welding and of other ways to lead his life. And then there's the knowledge of applied mathematics being generated as the students interact with each other at their desks, around the projector, and teachers that pay serious money to have their students care enough about math to argue over it. Though not explicitly present, there's one more kind of knowledge surrounding this scene, a powerful consequential knowledge, the knowledge that informs public policy. Such knowledge can include some of the kinds of knowledge I've listed, though too often it doesn't. It's primarily demographic and administrative knowledge, student background information, rates of enrollment, retention, cost. Now, it's important knowledge, for it provides a broad view of trends and contributes to administrative and financial operations and accountability. But it is limited. It lacks the lived experience of the people it represents. As the narrator explains to Ray, he hopes to add other kinds of knowledge to this policymaking knowledge.
That's a really good place to stop. So let me take a moment to explain the differences between Duckworth and Rose's theories. So Duckworth is arguing that students who are more successful have 4 qualities, and she describes, or the narrator of the YouTube video describes those qualities. She labels them as grit. Now, being at the University of Pennsylvania, which is a really prestigious program, one would argue that Duckworth is commonly seeing students who already have access to money, and their parents might have been educated. They maybe didn't have issues of food insecurity or housing insecurity. They may not have experienced racial or gender discrimination or profiling. And so some of the criticisms of Duckworth's theory is that she tends to look at grit through the perseverance of people who had all of the opportunities already given to them. It's easier, some might say, to have grit if you're not fighting against so many barriers already. Also, some of the criticisms of Duckworth's theory is that grit often kind of makes a individual problem out of a social issue. So if a student isn't able to be successful, one might say that the student didn't want it badly enough. They didn't try hard, while at the same time, this student might have been fighting all kinds of other challenges just to get to school. So for example, you might have seen on Facebook or social media those memes that show a student needs a pencil to succeed. And we talk about, they don't bring their pencils to school, without thinking about how many other things that student had to overcome just to get to school in the first place. And then, they don't have a pencil because they also don't have lunch, and they don't have adequate housing, or maybe they're taking care of their siblings. Now, that's Rose's argument. Rose is arguing that ideas about grit tend to fall short when you're talking about students who are, like I said earlier, disenfranchised. They're already set apart from the system. Now, proponents of Duckworth's theory on grit think it's important to keep in mind that, a lot of our success we oftentimes think comes from an innate, kind of a natural ability. And that maybe for you in this class, if writing doesn't come easy for you, or if reading is difficult, it's because you don't want it badly enough, or it's because you're not naturally good at it. But really, our success in college is often the outcome of a lot of work and a lot of effort. So for example, I have a PhD, but I was not in gifted and talented in high school. I had a baby at 18. I had another baby at 20. I wasn't especially the brightest student in my class when I was in high school or in college. I was probably, a solid B student, but I didn't come from a family with a lot of money. I grew up in a double-wide trailer in Dublin, Texas. But what I did have was a lot of perseverance. When I got one of my first papers back and it was marked up from my instructor, the first thing I did, to be honest, was I went back to my desk and I cried. I really did cry. Great big tears, because I thought I wasn't college material. I thought that, people who were college material didn't have babies. They weren't on food stamps. They didn't live in government housing. They didn't grow up in double-wide trailers on a farm. I thought people who had college degrees were already smart. They come into classes and they get A's right out of the gate. And instead, I got this paper back that was marked up, and I cried. And then the next day, I decided I was done crying, and I turned over that paper and I looked at the feedback. And I made a list of everything that instructor had said that I, missed or got incorrect. And I wrote a list. And then I looked up the rule, or I looked up some of the ideas about how to fix it. And then I just committed to myself that I won't make that mistake again on the next paper. And so I made a list of all the ways that I can improve, and I fixed it for the next paper. I was worried about having enough time to study. I had this vision of college that you would sit down to write a paper and you would crank out these all-nighters, right? If it's time to study for a class, you have to stay up all night to study. But I had a baby. I couldn't stay up all night and study and then be awake the next day for a baby to take care of. So what I did was well, if I can't study all night, I can study a little bit every single day. And I'll study a little bit every single day for 2 hours or 30 minutes. So that way when it does come time for the test, I don't have to do it all at once. And I set up a pattern and a schedule, and I would study every day for at least 30 minutes when when my baby would go to sleep. He would typically go to sleep at 7, and I would study from 7 to 10 every single night, regardless if I had a test or homework or reading. I would review my notes and I would rewrite my notes and I would study. And so that's kind of some of the tensions or the ways in which Duckworth and Rose align, but the ways in which they also disagree with each other. And so let's look now at some of the other ideas. So Duckworth's and Rose essays are all the more interesting when we consider how institutional biases, that was what I was talking about early, those kind of systems in place that keep certain demographics from being less successful, like institutional racism or xenophobia. When institutional biases set up some students for failure and encourage others towards success. Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, describes his experiences navigating through educational systems in his short 3-minute clip, and I'll let you watch that one on your own. Malcolm Gladwell discusses the importance of diversity in education in his podcast, Mrs. Buchanan's Period of Adjustment. And if you're interested in those, you can watch those videos also. So for this discussion forum, consider and respond to the 2 videos and Rose's blog post in the hub in approximately 250 words. You can reference or include your thoughts on Tyson's and Gladwell's discussions in your response as well if you would like. If you're struggling to develop your discussion, you may find guidance on this page useful. So, some things to consider when writing your 250-word response. What was surprising or intriguing to you about these sources? How did some of these sources challenge you and your thinking? What were some of the differences or similarities between the sources and what you already knew or what you'd read before? And how do themes and ideas from these sources relate to things you are learning or have learned in other classes? After you've completed your response, reply in a fully developed paragraph, approximately 50 words, to 2 of your classmates' postings. This assignment will be evaluated as a completion grade. The purpose then is to give you an opportunity to practice academic writing in a low-stakes environment. As long as you're meeting the requirements for the assignment, your evaluation for participation in this discussion will be 1 original thread, 33, 1 original thread plus 1 reply, 66, and 1 original thread plus 2 replies, 100. And remember that there are 2 models from the previous lesson that respond to these same questions, even if the topics are a bit different. If you have any questions, be sure to send me an email or log into class during office hours, and I'll be happy to help.